They told her she was lucky. A scholarship to the most exclusive school on the continent. A chance to change her destiny. But 8-year-old Amara Johnson is learning a different lesson behind the gilded gates of the Lycée International. In a world of polished whispers and old money, her skin, her hair, her very existence is a transgression. The abuse is quiet, surgical, and sanctioned by silence. It will culminate in a brutal act of violation in a second-floor bathroom, leaving her physically and spiritually scarred. But when the sheared-off braids of her identity fall to the wet floor, something else rises in Amara, not hope, but a cold, unyielding will. This is not a story about a victim. This is the origin story of a quiet storm, and the privileged world that created her as its target will soon learn that the most dangerous force is a brilliant child with nothing left to lose. The iron gates of the Lycée International des Joints et Toils swung open with a whisper, a sound so sleek and silent it was more unsettling than a screech. To 8-year-old Amara Johnson, holding her mother's trembling hand, they looked less like an entrance and more like the jaws of a polished silver beast. They were filigreed with intricate, frost-like patterns that caught the September sun, not to warm it, but to fracture it into 100 cold, dazzling shards. Beyond them, a landscape of impossible green stretched towards a palace of glass and pale stone. Lawns so flawless they looked painted, serpentine gravel paths that crunched with a sound like breaking bones. Under the wheels of passing luxury cars, it was a postcard of privilege, a world spun from money and whispers. It was nothing like home. Home was their third-floor walk-up in the city, with its comforting, clinging smells of cumin, thyme, and fried plantains that danced in the hallway. Home was walls thin enough to be a living tapestry of sound. Mr. Evans' melancholy jazz trumpet next door. The bass line from the twins' reggae down the hall. Her mother's soft humming over medical textbooks at the kitchen table. Here, the only sound was the distant, polite murmur of a fountain and the hollow echo of their own footsteps. On the grand drive, her mother, Cora, knelt suddenly on the pristine gravel. Heedless of her best trousers, she took Amara's face in her hands, her fingers calloused from endless scrubbing as a pediatric nurse, yet infinitely gentle, framing her daughter's cheeks. She pressed their foreheads together, a ritual of intimacy and strength. "Remember, baby," Cora whispered, her voice a thin veil over a tremor of emotion. Her eyes, the same rich, warm brown as Amara's, were glistening pools holding back a tide. "You are brilliant. You are kind. Your mind is a galaxy. You are here because you earned it. You solved those puzzles, you wrote that story. You looked those interviewers in the eye and you shone. That scholarship." She tapped the acceptance letter in Amara's backpack. "That's not a gift. It's your key. You turn the lock yourself. Don't you ever let them make you feel otherwise." She tucked a stray braid, tipped with a simple blue bead, behind Amara's ear. The bead clicked softly against others. Amara nodded, swallowing hard. The weight of her mother's hope was a tangible thing. A cloak she felt settle on her small shoulders. She clutched her backpack tighter. It was made of vibrant kente cloth, a gift from her grandmother. During her last visit to Accra, burst of color and history amidst a sea of monogrammed leather satchels. Parker, Genevieve, three that glided past on little wheeled carts pulled by uniformed staff. The other children, cocooned in cashmere and confidence, glanced at her with a blank, passing curiosity, as one might glance at an unusual but insignificant bird. She was here because of the Horizon Initiative, a newly minted, heavily publicized scholarship for underrepresented gifted youth. A single full-ride spot. She was the first recipient, the pioneer. The brochure had featured a generic, smiling child of indeterminate ethnicity. Now, she was the flesh and blood reality. The junior residences smelled of lavender polish and new money. Her dorm room, Sycamore Suite, was larger than the entire living room and kitchen. of their apartment. The windows reached from floor to ceiling, offering a terrifyingly vast view of the manicured grounds. Her side of the room contained a bed, a desk, an empty bookshelf, and a wardrobe that echoed when she opened it. The other side was a universe unto itself. Her roommate, Elodie, stood on a plush stool, arranging a collection of crystal ponies on a floating shelf. She had hair the color of winter wheat, falling in a perfect, silken waterfall down her back. She wore a tailored wool dress the shade of a dove's wing. She turned as Amara entered, her gaze sweeping from Amara's face to the kente bag, to the single, scuffed suitcase the porter had left just inside the door. Her blue eyes were not unkind. They were simply empty, like a clean pane of glass. She said nothing. Not hello, not I'm Elodie. She just turned back to her ponies, adjusting a rearing stallion with a fingertip. The silence she wielded was heavier, more suffocating than any noise. The unpacking was a quiet, lonely ceremony. Amara laid out her few possessions, 2 extra uniforms, carefully labeled. Her favorite books, their spines cracked with love. A photograph of her and her mother, laughing on Coney Island, the wind whipping their hair. A small, carved wooden bird from her father, sent from somewhere he couldn't name. She placed the bird on the windowsill. It looked small and lost against the expanse of glass. The abuse did not start with a bang. It began, as all truly effective poisons do, with an absence. A vacuum where connection should have been. In the refectory, a vast cathedral of polished oak and stained glass. Amara would collect her tray. The food was beautiful, tiny, and strange towers of delicate vegetables. Sauces drizzled like paint, and seek a place. She would sit, and the 4 chairs around her would remain obstinately, conspicuously empty. Conversations at adjacent tables would dip into hushed tones, then resume, peppered with glances. Girls would giggle, a bright, bubbling sound, then fall into a dead silence as she passed, their eyes following her until she was seated, alone. The message was not shouted. It was breathed into the air. You are not one of us. In class, the isolation took a more intellectual form. In Madame Laurent's history class, when the question of colonial resource distribution arose, Amara, her hand shooting up, cited a specific example from a book her grandmother had given her about West African gold. Yes, quite, Madame Laurent said, her smile tight as a drum skin. Folk perspective. Moving on to the treaty's formal terms, her correct answer in advanced mathematics was met with a brisk, adequate, but let's see a more elegant solution from someone else. Her voice, her contributions, were treated as interruptions to a preordained narrative. The first physical contact was a masterpiece of plausible deniability. In the grand hallway, a cavernous space of veined marble lined with portraits of stern, pale benefactors, all men, all looking as if they'd tasted something sour. Amara was walking, head down, to music class. A boy named Thierry, ice blonde hair, eyes the gray of a winter sea, was larking about with a friend. He stumbled, his body pivoting with surprising force, his elbow connecting squarely with Amara's shoulder, driving her sideways into the unyielding stone of a pillar. The air left her lungs in a pained whoosh. Stars danced behind her eyes. Oh la la. Clumsy me, Thierry drawled, not even breaking his stride, already laughing at something else with his friend. A teacher, Monsieur Renard, monitoring the hall, glanced over. He made a slight movement, then seemed to think better of it. He adjusted his silk tie, cleared his throat, and looked intently at his clipboard. The lesson was immediate. Some collisions were invisible. Then came the names, hissed like steam from a vent as she walked the labyrinthine corridors. Scholarship, the bursary girl, charity, case, one particularly creative boy called her the helps kid, a title that spread like a stain. Her belongings began a slow migration into the void. The hand-embroidered pencil case her mother had spent nights finishing vanished from her desk. It reappeared 2 days later in the lost and found. The delicate thread slashed, the fabric stained with purple ink. A book of Maya Angelou poetry. A birthday gift from her mother with "To my phenomenal woman, love." Mama inscribed inside, went missing from the library Carol. She found it in the art room trash bin, the cover torn off, the pages defaced with crude drawings. With a heart pounding a mix of fear and nascent fury, she went to Madame Dubois, the house mistress of the junior residences. Madame Dubois's office was a shrine to tasteful beige. She listened, steepling her fingers, as Amara stammered out the incidents. "Amara, ma chérie," she sighed, the sound like wine through dry leaves. "Children will be children, no. A certain rough and tumble is natural. Are you absolutely certain you didn't misplace the items? A new environment, so many new things to keep track of. It can be overwhelming for someone not used to such space." Her smile was a thin, non-conductive wire. "Perhaps you could try to be more organized. Keep your things closer." The dismissal was absolute. Her reality was not just challenged. It was framed as a product of her own incompetence, her inherent lack of familiarity with space. The marble walls of the lycée were not just physical. They were psychological, reflecting back a distorted image of herself as the problem. Her refuges were few, and therefore sacred. The library was a hushed, towering space that smelled of dust and wisdom. Here, among the stacks, she was just another seeker. The art room, however, was her sanctuary. It was gloriously, authentically messy. The air hung with the earthy scent of clay, the tang of turpentine, the promise of acrylics. Her art teacher, Ms. Rosario, was a woman of vibrant colors herself, with wild, dark curls and forearms forever flecked with a rainbow of paints. She moved with a joyous, energetic grace. "Amara," she'd exclaim, peering at a drawing. "This line work, the movement here. Tell me about this color. Why this fierce, wonderful orange right next to this deep blue?" She spoke to Amara not as a problem or a symbol, but as an artist. For 40 minutes twice a week, Amara existed not as scholarship, but as a creator. She poured her homesickness onto paper, the vibrant, swirling chaos of her grandmother's village market in Accra, the comforting, geometric patterns of her mother's favorite kitchen cloth, the wise, smiling face of Mr. Evans from next door. Which is why the violation of that sanctuary was a special kind of cruelty. One Tuesday afternoon, she entered the art room early, her heart light with a new idea. Her portfolio was on her usual shelf. She pulled out the large sheet of paper. Her market scene, a riot of careful detail and loving memory, was ruined. Someone had taken a thick, black permanent marker and drawn grotesque, cartoonish grins and popping eyes over the faces of the market women. Across the bottom, in jagged, aggressive capitals, was scrawled, "Mud Hut." Amara stared. The hot, jagged stone that had been forming in her throat for weeks now swelled, threatening to choke her. Her eyes burned, but she willed the tears back. She was learning. Tears here were not a release. They were a currency, a weapon to be used against her. Proof of weakness. Proof she couldn't take it. She carefully rolled up the defiled drawing, her hands steady only through immense force of will. She did not show it to Ms. Rosario. To involve her kind teacher felt like drawing enemy fire onto one of the only safe places she had. The worst of them, the architect of this quiet terror, was Chloe DeVries. At 10, she was the undisputed queen of the junior school. She possessed a cold, flawless beauty, hair like white gold, eyes of a glacial blue, features so precise they seemed sculpted from marble. Her authority did not come from loudness, but from a profound, unshakable certainty. She was old money, generations of it, and she moved through the lycée as its rightful heir. Her abuse was never reckless. It was surgical, strategic, and almost always executed in the blind spots of adult supervision. A spilled glass of ice water, oh so accidentally, drenched Amara's back in the lunch queue, leaving her shivering through afternoon classes. A foot, seemingly just stretching, appeared on the top step of the grand staircase. sending Amara stumbling down 3 terrifying steps, her books scattering like frightened birds. The theft of her single, precious pair of good black tights before a mandatory Founders Day assembly forced her to attend in her regulation socks. The snickers that day were not hushed. They were a visible, audible wave that followed her to her seat. She was a walking mark of poverty, and they made sure she, and everyone else, never forgot it. Chloe's words were her sharpest tools. "Do they have electricity where you're from? Scholarship?" she'd ask in a tone of folk curiosity during geography. "I mean, for real houses." In the locker room, she'd remark, "Your hair is so interesting. Does it ever actually get clean?" Each comment was a tiny, precise incision, designed to separate Amara from the group, to frame her as the alien, the other. One rainy Wednesday in late October, the campaign escalated into open warfare. Amara had been bumped into a sodden flower bed on the way to botany, her uniform skirt and knees caked in thick, chocolatey mud. Desperate to avoid another infraction for a soiled uniform, she ducked into a little used bathroom on the second floor of the history wing. She was dabbing at the mud with wet paper towels, the brown stains stubbornly spreading, when the door opened. Chloe entered, flanked by her 2 most constant shadows, Isabel, a tall, sharp-faced girl, and Sandrine, who was pudgy and perpetually smirked. The door clicked shut with a sound of finality. "Look," Chloe said, her voice sweet and light as arsenic. "It's trying to clean itself." She tilted her head. "Does the dirt even come off? Or is it just part of it?" Amara kept scrubbing, her focus entirely on the stain. Her heart, however, was a frantic animal hurling itself against the bars of her ribs. "I asked you a question, scholarship." Amara remained silent. Words were traps. Silence was the only fortress she had left, its walls growing thicker by the day. Chloe's porcelain composure cracked, not with rage, but with icy irritation. She stepped forward and snatched the wad of wet paper towels from Amara's hand, flinging them into the sink. "You don't listen, do you? You don't belong here. You're a stain on this school. My father says your kind only get in because people feel guilty. You're not a student. You're a pity project." The words landed with more force than Therese shove. They didn't bruise her shoulder. They aimed for her soul. They attacked the very foundation her mother had built. The story she told herself to get through the days. "I am smart. I earned this. I earned my place," Amara whispered. The words scraped her throat raw, emerging as a dry rustle. Chloe laughed, a high, crystalline sound that bounced off the tiles. "You earn nothing. You're here to make the school brochures look diverse. A little dark spot in the photo. That's all." She took another step, her proximity a violation. "You need to understand your place. It's not with us. It's nowhere near us." She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to Isabel, who smoothly turned the lock on the bathroom door. The click was deafening. Sandrine, her smirk widening, reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a pair of small, sharp sewing scissors, the kind from the textile arts workshop with pointed tips. A cold terror, pure and primal, flooded Amara's veins, turning her limbs to ice water. She backed up until the cold tiles pressed into her spine. "Hold her," Chloe commanded, her voice devoid of emotion. Isabel and Sandrine grabbed her arms, their grips surprisingly strong, pinning her against the wall. Amara kicked, she thrashed, a wild, desperate energy surging through her. But they were bigger, a year or 2 older, and there were 2 of them. Their hands were like manacles. Chloe stepped forward, the scissors glinting in the sterile fluorescent light. Her expression was one of detached, clinical curiosity, as if she were about to dissect a fascinating insect. She reached out and took a handful of Amara's hair, gathering one of the beautiful, beaded braids her mother had carefully woven just days ago. Snip! The sound was obscenely loud in the tile acoustics. A thick, rope-like lock of her hair, the blue and yellow beads suddenly purposeless, fell to the wet floor with a soft, terrible thwop. Amara froze. The violation was so intimate, so profound, it stole her breath, her fight, her very thoughts. It was an attack on her body, her culture, her mother's love. Snip, snip. Chloe worked with a methodical efficiency. She didn't hack. She sheared, braid after braid. Each snip a punctuation mark in a sentence of hatred fell to the floor. The beads scattered, skittering across the tiles like fleeing insects. Amara stopped struggling. She detached. Her spirit retreated to a small, dark room deep inside herself, behind the memory of her grandmother's vibrant market, behind the sound of her mother's humming. She became a statue, a witness. From this faraway place, she watched the girl with the angelic face dismantle her, piece by piece. When it was done, the physical sensation was the first thing that rushed into the void. Her head felt terrifyingly light, uneven, exposed. Cold air touched patches of her scalp she'd never felt before. The remaining strands stuck out in ugly, jagged clumps. The floor around her was a nest of black threads and colorful beads. Chloe surveyed her work, tilting her head. A slight, satisfied smile touched her lips, the first genuine emotion Amara had ever seen on her face. It was the smile of a job completed. She dropped the scissors into the porcelain sink. They clattered, ringing loudly before settling. "There," Chloe said, her voice soft and conversational again. "Now you look the part. A little urchin. A street thing. Maybe now you'll stop pretending to be something you're not." They unlocked the door. Isabel and Sandrine released her arms, their grips vanishing as if they'd never been there. They filed out without a backward glance, their footsteps echoing down the corridor until they were swallowed by silence. Amara slid down the wall, her legs giving way. She sat amidst the wreckage of her hair. She didn't touch it. She didn't scream. She just sat, staring at the opposite wall, at a small, hairline crack in the grout. Her mind perfectly, terrifyingly blank. She sat until the bell for next period rang, a distant, melodic chime that felt like a mockery of order. Then, moving with the jerky precision of an automaton, she gathered the severed braids. She didn't look at them. She scooped them up, the soft hair feeling alien in her hands, and shoved the tangled mass into the main compartment of her backpack. From her pocket, she pulled the dark blue school beanie, part of the winter sports uniform, forbidden in regular class. She yanked it down over the ruin of her head. It was too big, and it slipped down almost to her eyebrows, but it covered the evidence. She walked to her next class, advanced French with Monsieur Leclerc. She took her seat in the back. No one mentioned the hat. No one met her eyes. Monsieur Leclerc began a lecture on subjunctive clauses. The conspiracy of silence was total, impenetrable, and more damning than any accusation. That night, in the shared bathroom after lights out, Amara stood under the scalding spray of the shower. She let the water beat down on the uneven, hacked patches, on the strange, vulnerable landscape of her scalp. The physical sensation was a dull echo of the shock. Then, finally, the dam broke. Sobs racked her small frame, violent and silent. Her face contorted in agony, no sound escaped. The tears mixed with the shore stream, swallowed by the drumming water, witnessed by no one. She cried for her lost hair, for her violated self, for the crushing loneliness. She cried until her chest ached and her eyes were raw. Later, wrapped in a thin towel in the dark of her room, Elodie was a silent mound in the other bed, either asleep or pretending to be. She made the weekly call to her mother on the regulated dorm phone in the common area. She could hear the profound exhaustion in Cora's voice, the weariness of a double shift spent soothing sick children. "Hey, my star. Is everything okay? How's the work? Are you making any friends?" Amara's eyes went to the bulge of her backpack under her bed, hiding its terrible cargo. She caught her reflection in the black window, a small, shadowy figure with a too large beanie, features blurred by darkness. The lie formed, cold and heavy as lead. "Yes, Mama," she whispered, her voice flat, devoid of the light her mother longed to hear. "Everything's fine. The work is challenging. I'm learning a lot. She hung up the phone, the receiver slipping from her numb fingers. The lie settled in her chest, a new, permanent weight. She was learning. She was learning that justice was a fairy tale for places with thin walls and jazz music. She was learning that kindness was a liability. She was learning that in this beautiful, sparkling marble cage, she was utterly, catastrophically alone. The first layer of Amara, the trusting, hopeful girl who believed in fairness, who missed her neighbor's trumpet, who thought brilliance was enough, had been sheared away as cleanly as her braids. What was left on the cold floor of that bathroom was raw nerve, watchful eyes, and a heart beginning to crust over with a scar tissue of pure survival instinct. This was not an end. It was a terrible, silent genesis. The war for her soul, for her right to simply exist without apology, had been declared, and the first, brutal battle was lost. But Amara, in the deepest, most hidden chamber of her being, felt a tiny, stubborn ember stir amidst the ashes. It gave no warmth. It offered no comfort. It was not the flame of hope. It was something older, harder, more elemental. The cold, dark, implacable coal of a will to survive and to endure, as she was beginning to understand, was the first act of a revolution. The days after the bathroom were a study in quiet, strategic camouflage. Amara wore the beanie without question, enduring a single, clipped reprimand from a prefect that she ignored. Her silence, once a fortress, became a tool. She made herself small, uninteresting, a shadow flitting along the edges of the lycee's grand spaces. She stopped raising her hand in class, even when the answer bloomed, perfect and complete, in her mind. She ate quickly, alone, her back to the room. She was a ghost in the machine. And ghosts, she was learning, could see things the living overlooked. Her focus turned outward. She began to map the ecosystem of the lycée with the scientist's detachment. She noted the hierarchies, which teachers were feared, which were dismissed. She saw that Monsieur Renard, the history teacher who had looked away, was deeply in debt to the De Vries family. His wife's gallery was funded by Chloe's mother. She overheard a phone call fragment in an empty corridor confirming it. She learned that Sandrine, the pudgy accomplice, was desperately insecure about her family's new money, status, and clung to Chloe for validation. Isabel's parents were in a vicious divorce, freezing assets. Her place here was precarious. She stored these facts like shiny, sharp stones in a pouch within her mind. Her true sanctuary became the school's sprawling, walled gardens, specifically the forgotten kitchen garden near the old greenhouses. It was there she first saw the groundskeeper. He was an older black man, bent over a bed of rosemary, his hands, broad and scarred, moving with a tender precision that contrasted with his weathered face. He wore a simple canvas jacket, a name stitched on the breast, Gabriel. He hummed while he worked, a low, resonant tune that was neither jazz nor reggae, but something older, with a deep, rootsy soul. For weeks, she simply watched him from behind a skeletal lilac bush. He never hurried. He spoke to the plants, to the birds. One afternoon, early winter frost was predicted. Amara, hidden, saw him meticulously draping burlap over the most delicate herbs. He didn't have to. No one would check. The next day, after another silent lunch, she went to the garden. She stood at the edge of his plot. He didn't look up from weeding a row of leeks. The frost didn't get them, she said, her voice rusty from disuse. Gabriel paused. He sat back on his heels and looked at her. His eyes were the color of rich soil, and they held a deep, calm intelligence. He took in the beanie, the oversized blazer, the watchfulness in her posture that no 8-year-old should possess. No, he said, his voice a gravelly warmth. It didn't. Some things look tender but are stronger than they seem. They just need a little covering. His gaze was gentle but piercing. You're the scholarship girl. It wasn't a question, and it wasn't said like the others said it. It was a statement of fact, like you're the girl who likes the rosemary. Amara nodded, her guard a towering wall. but something in his presence kept her from fleeing. "My granddaughter has hair like yours used to be," he said softly, returning to his weeding. "Takes her mama hours to braid. A labor of love." The mention of her hair, of the used to be, was a lightning strike. Tears threatened, hot and immediate. She clenched her jaw, forcing them down. Gabriel didn't press. He worked in silence for a few minutes. "This garden," he said eventually, "is my library. Every plant has a story. Some are healers. Some are protectors. Some," he yanked out a stubborn weed with a crisp snap, "are thieves, sucking the life from the good soil. You learn to tell the difference. You learn which to nurture and which to pull out, root and stem." He glanced at her. "The school thinks this is just for pretty salads. They don't see the stories. They don't listen." Amara took a step closer. "Do you listen?" Gabriel smiled, a network of kind lines spreading from his eyes. "I'm the best listener in this whole place. The walls talk to me. The soil talks. I expect little girls with old eyes might have something to say, too." It wasn't an alliance, not then. It was a ceasefire with a neutral power. Amara began to visit the garden regularly. She didn't speak much at first. She'd sit on a sun-warmed stone and watch him work. He'd tell her the names of plants: comfrey for mending, lavender for calm, nettle handled with care for strength. He never asked for her story. He simply offered a space where she didn't have to be a ghost. One afternoon, he handed her a pair of small, warm gloves. The mint's getting unruly. Care to tame it? The physical act of digging her fingers into the cool earth, of smelling the pungent release of mint, was a therapy more profound than any words. As she worked, side by side with Gabriel, a sliver of the frozen core inside her began to thaw. Weeks passed. The ember of her wool, fanned by Gabriel's quiet dignity and the tangible proof of growth in the garden, began to glow hotter. It was no longer just about survival. It was about understanding the system in order to. What, she didn't know yet, but knowledge was power. Her nightly focus shifted from simply enduring the day to reviewing it, analyzing it. She began a secret ledger, not on paper, but in her memory palace, a technique from a book she'd read. In a quiet corner of the library, she'd close her eyes and file her observations. Renard, debt to DeVries. Sandrine, father in tech, insecure. Isabelle, parents divorce. Article 7 filed November 12. Madame Dubois, frequent migraines. Meets with headmaster after board calls. The key turned in the lock on a cold January morning. Amara was in the library, hidden in a carrel, reviewing a complex math theorem. Chloe, Isabelle, and Sandrine entered, whispering fiercely. They thought the library was empty. They were wrong. "It's not enough," Chloe hissed, her glacial composure gone, replaced by a petulant frustration. "My father says the board is asking questions. The diversity metrics aren't translating. They need proof she's failing. Academically, socially. They need a reason to revoke the scholarship. After the probation year, the teachers give her good marks, even when they don't want to," Sandrine whined. "She's too quiet to mess up socially." "Then we make her mess up," Chloe said, her voice dropping. "The spring gala, the alumni dinner. It's the biggest event. If she causes a scene there, embarrasses the school in front of the donors, it would be irrevocable." "How?" Isabelle asked, her voice sharp. "I'm working on it. Something with the presentation. She's doing that art project for Rosario. It could be unfortunate." A cruel smile edged into her voice. "A visual. Something that proves she doesn't embody the lycée spirit." He's already spoken to Dubois and the headmaster. They're receptive. They moved away, their whispers fading. Amara sat frozen, not with fear, but with a clarifying cold. So it was sanctioned, not just by silence, but by policy. Her tenure was a probation. Her failure desired by the very board that had paraded her as a success. Her mother's key was being turned from the outside, and they'd given her their plan. The spring gala, her art project. Ms. Rosario had encouraged her to enter a major piece in the gala student exhibition. Amara was working on a mixed-media sculpture, a girl fashioned from clay and reclaimed wood, sitting inside a beautiful, transparent box made of salvaged window glass. She'd called it the observatory. Now, she understood. Her art was to be the stage for her own destruction. That afternoon in the garden, she told Gabriel everything. The words poured out of her in a quiet, steady stream. The bathroom, the whispers, the ledger in her mind, Chloe's library conversation. She showed him the hidden braids, now brittle and dry. She didn't cry. She presented the facts. Gabriel listened, his face growing graver with each sentence. When she finished, he was silent for a long time, looking at the dormant earth. "They think you're a weed," he said finally. "They think they can pull you out and the garden will go back to how it was. They don't understand that a garden needs all kinds to be healthy. And they really don't understand that some plants," he looked at her, his eyes hard as flint, "are not weeds. They're old-growth trees. Slow to start, deep roots. And you can't pull out an old-growth tree without bringing down half the forest with it." "What do I do?" Amara asked, the question hanging in the frosty air. "You don't play their game," Gabriel said. "You change the board. They want a scene. Give them a revelation. They want you to fail. Show them what failure of their system looks like. You have the ledger. You have the truth. And you," he nodded at her sculpture plan, sketched on a napkin, "have an observatory. Time to show people what you've seen." A plan, cold, precise, and elegant, began to form in Amara's mind. It wasn't about screaming. It was about broadcasting. It wasn't about anger. It was about evidence. She threw herself into her sculpture with new purpose. But she also began a second, secret project in the digital archives of the library. Using research skills far beyond her years, she began to compile a dossier. She found public board meeting minutes that mentioned the Horizon Initiative and its review parameters. She cross-referenced alumni donations with building contracts awarded to companies like DeVries Holdings. She found the divorce filing for Isabel's parents, noting the freezing of assets and the hefty lycée tuition as a point of contention. She was careful. She used the public access terminals, left no digital trace a child could be blamed for. She printed nothing. She committed it all to her memory palace. Meanwhile, she allowed a carefully constructed facade of nervousness to show. She fumbled slightly when presenting in class. She asked Ms. Rosario anxious questions about the gala. She let Chloe's cohort see her seeming fear. The predator, seeing the prey falter, grew confident, less careful. The week before the gala, Amara went to Ms. Rosario. "I want to change my piece," she said, her eyes wide with feigned worrying. "The glass box. It's too fragile. What if it breaks? What if someone bumps into it?" Ms. Rosario, sensing the unspoken anxiety, put a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Art is about risk, Amara, but we can secure it. No one will bump it. But, could I add something to make it stronger? A base with words on it, like a poem." She let her voice tremble. Ms. Rosario, always an advocate for creative expression, agreed. "A foundational text. What a wonderful idea. What will you use?" "Just some things I've been thinking about," Amara said softly. What she built was not a poem. It was a plinth, a solid, unassuming cube of wood. And on every face of that cube, in tiny, exquisite, laser-cut letters, a service available in the design lab she had permission to use for her art project. She inscribed her ledger. On one face, a list of names, dates, and incidents. 3 of October 3rd. Pencil case slashed October 15th. Hair severed October 28th. On another, quotes from teachers dismissing her folk perspective. Adequate. Overwhelmed by space. On the third, the financial ties Renard, DeVries Gallery funding. DeVries Holdings, new West Wing contract. On the fourth, facing the wall until the right moment. The coup de grace. Excerpts from the board's probationary review. Parameters and the phrase sheet overheard. They need a reason to revoke the sculpture. The observatory sat on this plinth. The girl in the glass box was no longer looking down or inward. Amara had carefully repositioned her. Now, the clay and wood girl was looking out, her gaze directed through the glass at the place where the audience would stand. And in her hand, she held a single, perfect, dried braid, beaded in blue and yellow. The night of the spring gala arrived. The Lycée was transformed into a temple of opulence. Crystal glittered, champagne flowed, and the air hummed with a low, powerful murmur of wealth. The student exhibition was in the grand hallway. Beneath the portraits of the sour-faced benefactors, Amara stood beside her piece, wearing a simple, borrowed dress, her head now covered in soft, new growth that she left uncovered. She looked small and solemn. Chloe, radiant in a designer gown, swept past with her parents, shooting Amara a look of gloating triumph. The plan, Amara knew, was for Sandrine to accidentally spill punch on the electrical cord for the plinth small. A clumsy, chaotic scholarship girl ruining the evening. The De Vries family paused before the sculpture. Chloe's father, a man with Chloe's ice-blonde hair and a banker's calculating eyes, glanced at it dismissively. "Charming," he murmured. "Wait," said a sharp-eyed, older alumnus standing with them, a renowned art critic. She leaned in, peering at the plinth. "What is this?" "The text." She read aloud, softly at first, then her voice trailed off. Her eyes widened. She walked around the plinth, reading each face. The financial ties. The teacher quotes. The incident log. A hush fell around them. Other guests drifted over, curious. "Philippe," the critic said to Chloe's father, her voice like cracked ice. Is this about the new wing contract?" Chloe's father's face drained of color. He bent down, reading. He saw his own company's name. He saw the link to Renard. Madame Dubois and the headmaster, smelling trouble, glided over. "Is there a problem?" The headmaster boomed, his smile strained. "This installation," the critic said, her voice now carrying across the hushed hall. "It is a damning piece of institutional critique. The girl in the box, observing you. And this text. These are allegations. Specific ones. Childish fantasy," the headmaster blustered. But he was reading now too, his face purpling as he saw the teacher quotes attributed to his staff. "Are these board meeting excerpts?" a board member asked, his finger hovering over the fourth face, still turned to the wall. Amara, at that moment, reached out and calmly, slowly, rotated the plinth. The final text was revealed to the crowd. A collective gasp rippled through the elite assembly. There, in cold, official language, was the blueprint for her dismissal. "This says the Horizon Scholar is on a probationary review," the board member said, his voice thunderous. "That success metrics are social integration and institutional fit. I was told this was a merit-based, permanent scholarship." Pandemonium, quiet and furious, erupted. The De Vrieses were besieged with questions about contracts. Teachers named in the quotes were frantically denying. The board members were in a tight, angry circle. The art critic was on her phone, talking to an editor. Chloe stood frozen, her triumph turned to ashes. She looked at Amara, not with hatred, but with a dawning, terrified understanding. Amara met her gaze. She didn't smile. She didn't glare. She simply observed. It was the most powerful thing she could have done. In the ensuing scandal, the Lycée's marble foundations cracked. A hushed external investigation was forced. Madame Dubois took an early retirement. Monsieur Renard resigned. The board was overhauled. The Horizon Initiative terms were made transparent and permanent. Chloe's father's influence waned significantly. Amara was not celebrated as a hero. She was, in many ways, more isolated than ever. But the isolation was now of her own choosing. The predation had stopped. The silence was broken. She had used their own tools: art, presentation, information to dismantle the trap. On the last day of term, she went to the kitchen garden. Gabriel was pruning the rosemary. "They're asking me to come back next year," she said. "Will you?" he asked. She looked at the strong, fragrant plants, at the rich, cared-for soil. "Yes," she said. "The garden's not fixed, but the worst weeds are gone. And I'm not a weed. I'm a new kind of plant. They're going to have to learn to make space for me." Gabriel nodded, a slow, deep smile spreading across his face. "That's my girl." Amara Johnson walked back towards the marble buildings. No longer a ghost, no longer a target. She was a fact. A brilliant, resilient, undeniable fact. The cage was still there, but she was no longer just living in it. She was studying its lock, and she had all the time in the world to learn how to open it, for herself and for the ones who would inevitably come after. The cold, hard coal inside her still glowed, but now, fed by the oxygen of truth and the warmth of one old man's faith, a tiny, steady flame had finally ignited beside it. It was not the roaring fire of vengeance. It was the quiet, enduring flame of a justice she had built with her own two hands.